This education forum was organized by the St. Paul NAACP's Education Committee to provide you, the general public, with factual information on the upcoming St. Paul Public Schools referendum. I agreed to moderate this forum because I believe in citizen participation, and I think voters should be well informed when they go to the polls. I'm a professional writer by trade. Though I have worked with the St. Paul Public Schools in various day jobs, I am not now and never have been an employee of the school district. Before we press on, I want to emphasize two things. First, I repeat, this is a form of information, not an endorsement for the referendum. Second, it's worth noting that the school district is required to ask voters for this levy, while the city of St. Paul and Ramsey County are not required to do so. You all are invited and encouraged to participate in tonight's forum. We invite you to submit questions to the panel on index cards, which we'll provide along with a pen or pencil. Your questions will be given to me, and I will pose them to our panelists after all of our panelists have spoken. You can ask a general question, or you may direct a question to a specific panelist. To do so, write the name of the panelist you want to answer the question on your card. We'll get to as many of your questions tonight as possible, roughly in the order in which I received them. Similar questions may be combined. At the end of the evening, all of our panelists have agreed to stick around for additional discussion. Thank you to SPNN, the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, for recording this program. Thank you to our panel members, to you, our studio audience, and to those of you who will view broadcasts of this evening, and of course, a special thanks to the St. Paul chapter of the NAACP. Now, let me introduce to you our panelists in the order in which they'll be speaking. Halla Henderson is the current chair of the St. Paul School Board. She was elected in 2021. Ms. Henderson will address the reasons why the district decided to request an additional levy in addition to its regular levy and other referendum levies still in force. Dr. Stacie Stanley is the superintendent of St. Paul Public Schools, where she attended kindergarten through 12th grade and graduated from St. Paul's Central. She earned her doctorate degree from Bethel University. Dr. Stanley will explain exactly what the district is asking for, what the district will do with the money, and what the district will do to balance its budget if the levy does not pass. Next is Quintin Ocama, or Mr. Quintin. He's a kindergarten teacher at Maxfield Elementary, and he's the campaign chair of the Yes for SPPS effort and a member of the St. Paul Federation of Educators Executive Board. He's a lifelong St. Paul resident and St. Paul graduate. And Mr. Quintin will explain what teachers will do with the increase in per pupil spending and how the levy not passing may impact their teaching. Teresa Mozur is a local community leader and parent of a second grader enrolled in the St. Paul Public Schools. She's currently managing the campaign in support of the referendum and as part of the Vote Yes for St. Paul Schools Committee. She will offer a parent's perspective of what the increase in per pupil spending offered by the levy would mean to parents and children, as well as what its non-passage would mean. And finally, Imani Cruzen is a reporter for the St. Paul Pioneer Press covering the St. Paul Public Schools and Ramsey County. Ms. Cruzen will summarize the big picture, explaining how the levy request will impact property taxes for homeowners and businesses, explaining the district's regular levy, and highlighting information on the district's city and county maximum levies for next year, along with the school districts. To make sure we have time for your questions, Julie Borgerding, July of the NAACP, will be keeping time for our panelists holding up signs to keep them from running too long. And now, let us begin with Board Chair Halla Henderson.
Thank you. That was so incredibly kind. Thank you. I am so happy to be here and excited to have this conversation. I think it's so important that folks are aware of not only what these decisions mean, but then also how we got here. And so I think I want to start with some background. So boards and districts and district leaders like ours are making decisions around referendums, going out for referendums across the state. St. Paul is not alone in that. But if we move back quite a few years now, I would say the last 5 years, the district and the board have had to make difficult decisions around what we can fund for our schools and for our students every year. So going back to 2021, we had, I think, a incredibly difficult conversation and path for our community as we did a facilities redesign in Vision 1.0 and essentially had to talk about spaces and how we're using spaces and are we using them equitably in providing our students a space and the resources that they need. And we found that there were opportunities for us, but those opportunities only came if we made hard decisions and closed schools. Not long after that, we were dealing with the sunsetting of the federal ARP dollars. We knew that those dollars would go away, but we also knew that the district had an opportunity when we received them to invest in our community and invest in our students. We used those dollars to support student services as they returned to our classroom following COVID to deal with learning loss. We used dollars to support our individual supports for staff and students, including literacy supports, which we know is not only a need for our students, but also for our staff to make sure that we are providing them with the resources and the professional development to be able to effectively teach our students and get them out into the world as well-rounded adults ready to stay in St. Paul and serve our community as well. We had to make additional cuts in that same context because for every piece that we wanted to retain from the investments we made with those ARP dollars, something had to go away. And those were difficult conversations. It was difficult to say to community, for every investment that we're making in literacy and in math supports, we are also then having to make hard conversations about the programs and the resources that draw our students into our schools. Students, if you ask them, they might not say that math class, I'm sorry, Superintendent, is their favorite moment of the day, but they will say that moment or those times that they're able to do art, where they're able to have time one-on-one and learn about music and musical instruments and to explore and to be creative, that is what draws our students back into their classrooms, and that is what keeps them ready and active and ready to learn. And we knew that in order to provide the core services that our students needed and to continue to invest and push against the disparities that we see, we needed to also maintain those services. So we made hard decisions. We continued to make hard decisions last year. We made additional deep cuts to try to balance our budget. Again, with the mindset of we needed to do what we could do to avoid impacting our classrooms and impacting our students as much as possible. And I would offer, however, even with all of those attempts, we still have impacted classrooms. We have made substantial reductions in the general operations of our buildings. We've made reductions throughout our district, throughout our central administration, and we've drawn our general fund balance down to about the board's bare minimum to avoid additional cuts. We have cut at this point, and I don't believe it's hyperbolic to say we've cut to the bone. We've cut as much as we can possibly cut without directly impacting the experience of our students and our staff. And so the board took all of that context into consideration to avoid, I think, this space, but ultimately have found ourselves in a place where to continue to develop long-term stability for the decade with the uncertainty that we're experiencing on the federal and state level, as well as maintaining the core programs and continuing to turn the corner and support our students, we need to take this rather dramatic step, but a necessary step for the future of our district.
Thank you for that, Chair. I'm going to pick up on that, and I really appreciate the fact that you did talk about the equity, because this referenda is everything about equity for our students. This referenda, thank you, is about everything about equity for our students. As Chair Henderson said, past couple of years have been really difficult for the district financially, and it was a tough decision to determine to go out to ask for $37.2 million. That's every year for the next 10 years. We know that impact for our taxpayers is going to be about $26 a month for a home that's $289,200 in value, or about $309 a year. And yet, we know that it is so important for students to be able to have those experiences that keep them going. Yes, I was a math teacher. That's why she said that. I want all students to love math. And I know, as a St. Paul Public Schools student, I love debate. It's probably why I'm a superintendent right now. I love debate. I absolutely loved being in Miss Mandel's dance class. I absolutely loved Mr. Akery's art class. All of those were so meaningful for me. And so this is not the icing on the cake. I tell folks this is the cake. This is the eggs, the flour, and the butter right now that makes that cake. We did go out to our community, though, because this was a very thoughtful process. And in June, we surveyed our resident families, and we explained to them the financial situation we were in, and we asked if they would support it. And they said yes, they would support it. Yes, in the high 70s, 78, 79%. As long as it would do four things: stabilize our funding, as Chair Henderson said we're seeking to do, maintain those broad range of academic supports, our arts and music, band and orchestra, our marching band, language and culture. I say that we are allowing our students to learn about the world right within the four walls of St. Paul Public Schools. We have Karen language programs, we have Hmong language programs, we have Spanish language programs, we have East African culture programs. They said they want us to keep those. And then also the career and college readiness programs. And so one of my delights as a superintendent is to get out into our schools. I've been to about a third of them at this point during the school year so far. And the other day I was at Humboldt, and I was in their FFA program. Yes, in St. Paul we have Future Farmers of America. And just delightful. I walked across the way and I saw that students were learning to repair small motors. So people dropped their lawnmower, they dropped their snowblower off. But then I walked a little bit further and I went into the welding department, and students are learning using CAD, and then CAD, computer assisted design, and they're designing on the computer. They're sending that to a 3D printer. They're putting large sheets of sheet metal through that 3D printer. They're taking those pieces, and then they go over and they weld, and they made the most beautiful metal roses that you could ever imagine. And they're not just making them to take home, give to, a special person in their life, but they're also selling those for fundraisers. So those are all skills that Chair Henderson talked about that our students will use not just in school, but they are going to go out into our community. Our employers are saying labor's short. We need more qualified candidates. The other thing I will say, our college and career readiness, we have AVID programs. I myself was part of the first program for first generation college attendees at St. Paul Central back in the 80s. It was called UPOP through the U of M. I was part of that. I know what a difference that made for me. And I want our kids to continue to have that very experience. It is so important. The other thing, I have been out and about in schools, and I see the work that we're doing around literacy. Literacy is the currency of power in the United States. And if you do not read, if you do not write well, you are not going to be successful. I say that all of us are up here right now because we have strong literacy skills, and each and every one of our 33,000 students deserves that. So we have a laser-like focus on literacy. We want to make certain that our students are reading at grade level so that by the time they get into the middle school, the high school, they can take advantage of everything they need. We have interventionists, though. We have something that's called SIPS teachers. SIPS is an acronym basically for curriculum that support students who aren't reading at grade level. And we need those positions. And those are some of the positions that we're going to lose. So the thought of kids not having access to band and orchestra, not having access to the arts, not having access to FFA, to welding, to CNA training classes, not having access to the literacy interventionists, all of that, which people may see as extra, it's not extra. It is foundational. It is the cake, and it will dramatically, and I too don't want to be hyperbolic, and this will dramatically change our students' experience. I know it will not be the experience that I had, that I was proud of for St. Paul Public Schools, if we are not able to pass the referenda for $37.2 million. Now, I will tell you, I was at Crossroads today, and I was in the classroom where a student was working on their math, and I was blown away by Miss Horton's class, because the student was learning to subtract in a little different way than I learned to subtract. But I could tell that she fundamentally understood what it meant to subtract 8 from 16. She didn't just say, carry, borrow the 1 and put it over or whatever, like I learned how to do. She said, I can't, Dr. Stanley, I can't subtract 8 from 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 10 and I'm going to trade it, and I'm going to have 16 tiles instead, and then I'm going to take 8 tiles away. Those are the experience that we want our kids to continue to have, that they must have to be prepared for the world that they're going into. Then I had a chance to leave and walk away and go into the coding classroom. And students were actually coding. They were making codes to make a bot move across the floor and move to the left. Again, those are experiences that our students need to be highly competitive and ready to go out into the workforce. Crossroads is an elementary school. We're starting to build their skills in elementary school so that by the time they get to high school and they're in a class like the theory of knowledge, which I was at Highland a couple of weeks ago, and they are thinking so deeply and so creatively about the status of what's going on in our world today. They weren't debating whether or not they agreed with something or didn't agree with something. They were thinking about the ethical aspects of that. So that is what this referenda is about this year, to make sure that our students are able to meet our mission. And our mission is for students to think critically, to pursue their dreams, and to change the world. And while I love math, you can't just do that with math. You have to do that with reading. You have to do that with the sciences. You have to do that with the arts. You have to do that in ways that are really helping to shape you to be a well-rounded student. Thank you.
Yeah, so, like they said, I'm an elementary teacher here in St. Paul. I teach at Maxfield. I've been honestly working with the district almost my entire adult life. I'm actually a second generation St. Paul Public Schools teacher, right? So this is home to me. This is family. And I'll tell you right now, and I know that our superintendent and our chair here have talked about it, things are pretty tight in our buildings right now. We have really gotten down, as I said, cut to the bone. For my building, that looks like, losing our art specialist, right? We had to make that difficult choice. You can see my lips moving. Oh, is that better? Man, sorry, I've lost my voice. I'm also a coach in the districts, and I was coaching a flag football game yesterday, and I was a lot of yelling. We won by 1 point. So I'll try to speak a little bit louder. So we've had to make some difficult choices in the district, and we've seen that in my building. We had to lose one of our art specialists. We've had to lose some of our math specialists. The district's done a really good job of stabilizing what our buildings look like in terms of classroom support, what I see day to day, what my colleagues see. We're holding our own right now. This referendum would allow us to make sure that as we continue, there's this baseline. I'm somebody, and I know that we talk about it a lot, that this referendum isn't the end all be all. We know, I think we all watch the news, there's so much uncertainty at the federal level, and you could even argue here at the state level as well in terms of funding. We know education funding ultimately is extremely inequitable. And I think the conversations that we see in DC right now create a lot of doubt. And for my colleagues, there's a lot of angst. If you're an EL teacher, if you're in special education, there is a lot of concern because we hear this rhetoric and, we all can turn off the news and a lot of us can compartmentalize things. But we take that. We carry that. I'll go into a break room, I'll have lunch, I'll go to a happy hour with a colleague, and they go, Quintin, what's going on? So we really, I think, my big thing to say here is that the referendum is an opportunity for St. Paul voters to really take this into their own hands. We can't do anything about what's going on in DC. We may not even have, the power to really shape policy and discussions here at the state capitol. But this is an opportunity for St. Paul voters. While we see this school district, and I've seen it, there's so much great things happening. I've taught SIPs, for example, systemic instruction and phonemic and phonetic awareness. It is an amazing intervention program that we were able to use with our American Rescue Fund Plan dollars that have shown some fantastic results in increasing literacy, bringing our kids up to grade level. Right? We want to continue to fund these positions throughout the district. My building has had to cut down to half time, right? Because as I said, the district is making some really hard choices. We're all making really hard choices at the building level, right? I just think this is these opportunities. If we're really serious as a community that we want St. Paul schools to be successful, and I really see this district as I look around the rest of the state. I look at our to our neighbors in Minneapolis. We've seen the growth. We've seen the excitement. We've seen these new programs. Our East African Magnet School, our dual language, our Hmong dual language programs that people are really excited about. That I hear from families. I hear from colleagues that they're growing like gangbusters, right? We look at our Spanish immersion programs where we know that they're for pre-K. There's a waiting list that it's like getting Taylor Swift tickets. So there's so much really great things happening in this district in spite of some of the budgetary constraints. And once again, this is really about, for us, taking it into our hands as voters and saying, yes, we want to continue, but also we're gonna continue to push. And I know the district, and I know that there are so many folks, even at the union, we need to continue to go and advocate to change these systems at the state and federal level. But right now, as we look right now, it's about us. It's about what we can do as residents, as voters, to make sure that we start treading water a little bit, and then really we can start pushing forward. And that's really what I got for you.
Hi, I'm Teresa. I'm a mother of a 7-year-old, and I'm a volunteer at my kids' school, here to give some of the parents' perspective on this. And the stakes feel really high for families because if the referendum fails, we know that means $37 million in cuts. And a lot of parents, many parents, already know what that looks like and what that feels like, because we have a district and a board that has made very difficult and responsible financial decisions thus far. For example, I live kitty corner from J.J. Hill Montessori School, and when I moved into my house 10 years ago, I always thought my future kids would go there. They could just walk down the street, and that would be their school. And today, that school is closed because the district has had to make those choices. And so when we considered schools 4 years ago for my daughter's kindergarten, we knew we didn't want that sort of disruption. And fortunately, we had great options that we were able to consider. I think we considered 4 or 5 different schools. And what $37 million in cuts would mean is maybe there's an adjustment in school student sections, and more schools have to hit their student classroom caps. That means you have fewer options as a parent when that happens. For the school that she goes to now, some of those COVID cuts that the ARPA funds that went away, those directly impacted her current school. And for the community, when I first entered it, I heard stories about how devastating it was for them. The 5th grade class lost orchestra, and parents had to scramble to fundraise to keep it alive. And they're still doing it. They're working and fighting as hard as they can. And this is not unique just to one school. This is a lot of these schools. The parents have really become the glue to stitch these programs together and keep things intact as much as they can. And so asking parents, if a failed referendum fails, asking parents to do even more than they already are is very untenable. I just met with the Central High School theater boosters, and they're doing everything possible to make that program as amazing as it is. They're doing Mamma Mia next month, or the week before Thanksgiving, and their theater program is fantastic. So if they were to lose staff on top of everything that they're doing right now, I don't see how they could sustainably keep it together. So in many ways, it's the boosters and the PTOs and PTAs and parent and family advocates within these schools that are able to preserve these programs. And I've visited many of them in my community outreach, and every one of them is actively fundraising, sometimes in the multiple tens of thousands of dollars, just to make sure the schools get the support they need, whether it's for the arts or even for, to make sure that there's 2 more field trips that they're able to make happen for their students. But there are also schools that don't have that built-in community support. They don't have the volunteer base. They don't have the wealth in their community to make those happen. So $37 million in cuts would only exacerbate current existing disparities and inequities that we're seeing in the schools. And as I understand it, the cuts would be anything that the schools are not contractually obligated to provide. And that means pre-K for 4-year-olds. And that would be devastating for young families. It means arts, music, theater, and even sports and athletics all would have to be considered. In one conversation I had with a parent, she was telling me about how when art was cut from her kid's school in 4th grade, she cried on the floor. And so there's real impacts that parents are seeing on students that, maybe they'll show up in the schools or maybe not, but this is not the well-rounded education that so many parents want for our students. And I just wanted to paint a picture of what this would really mean for a real-world impact on families across the city.
Okay, so my name is Imani Cruzen, and again, I cover St. Paul Public. Okay, now I can hear myself too. My name is Imani Cruzen, and I cover St. Paul Public Schools and Ramsey County for the Pioneer Press. So I'll speak a little bit more broadly to some of the levy impacts when it comes to the school district, and then I'll speak a little on the county side as well. St. Paul is a little more my colleagues' coverage, but so in November, what you'll be seeing on your ballot is really this levy request, which would be increasing the district's general revenue by about $1,073 per student. And as Stacie said earlier, that would bring in about $37.2 million to the school district. When it comes to the average homeowner, as Stacie again said, that would be about $309 a year for an average homeowner in St. Paul. Obviously, that depends on the value of someone's home or where they are in the city. Currently, the district spends about $23,000 per student, and property taxes make up about 20% of the district's budget. So it is quite a large chunk of the school district's budget. There have been similar referendums, most recently in 2018, as well as in 2006 and 2013. I believe the last time there was one that was not approved was 2002, but I would have to double check on that. So up until now, there have been similar referendums that have been approved. At this point, I think likely something that most voters are considering is how this plays into other levies that could be approved by the city and the county. The Ramsey County Board approved a levy increase of 9.75%. They follow a 2-year schedule, so that will go down in 2027, but if you go to the Pioneer Press website, you can see additional information in terms of neighborhood breakdown if the city, county, and school referendums are all, their levies are all approved. So I would definitely recommend that if I can. But as has kind of been touched on, the district has talked about some of what the cuts would be if this referendum is not approved. That largely seems to be like language and culture programming, career readiness programming. But at the same time, when I've spoken to officials, if this referendum is not approved, it really sounds like anything is on the table. So it's a lot for voters to consider, of course. But I would definitely suggest if anyone has any questions as well, that they could always reach out to me, since I do cover this. In terms of the city levy that was approved or proposed, it's 5.3%. So that's just something to take into consideration. The school district in September did approve their annual levy that's an annual process they go through every year, and that was actually went down by close to 2%. Typically, on average, that goes up around 3%, and that again is part of an annual process. So that's separate from this levy referendum that you will see on the ballot in November.
Okay, we've heard from the panelists in a general way, and we have heard from a board perspective, from the administrative role, from a classroom teacher, from a parent, and we've had outside impact from a newspaper reporter. Now it's time for your questions, and someone will be bringing questions up to me, and I will ask them pretty much in the order that we received them. I hope you wrote legibly, and we'll have time for additional questions. So if you have more than one question, write up another question, and we're underway. This is a general question. Does this have an impact on any mental health or health-related support for students, like social workers or nurses?
So I will take that one. And what I want to relate this to actually is to the cuts that could be coming down from the federal government. So a lot of people don't realize, but we actually use third-party billing. And for students who receive a variety of different services, whether it's mental health services, their nursing services, we have students who have diabetes and they need specific care. And so we actually do third-party billing through Medicaid. That was $5 million this year that we were able to receive funding back for the services that we provide. When we start to take into consideration the possible reductions that are coming down from the federal government, and then couple that with the $37.2 million shortfall that we know we'll have for the 26-27 year, it's just exacerbated. So we have co-located services. So we have our own social workers, we have our own counselors, and we have our own nurses. But then we also provide co-located services where we're contracting with other mental health organizations to come in and support our students, because we just would not be able to hire enough social workers or psychologists or things like that. Those types of things would have to be on the table for us to look at. That coupled with the possibility of that $5 million additional cut from due to the Medicaid cuts from the federal government would again have just a significant impact on our students. And I don't know if Mr. Quintin would like to talk about, just I can speak from when I was a principal and when I was a teacher, but I think it would be really powerful for you to speak about how those resources support your children.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a really, I think you've heard the word devastating used. Thinking about our school social worker, our school counselor, I have students who also go and or take advantage of some of those third-party services daily. I can't imagine what our school building would look like if those folks, at the end of the day, if they're not tied to a classroom, right? If everything has to be on the table, it would just be devastating. I work at a school that is highly, also we have a lot of highly mobile population. So not just your school social worker and what you think about. That's the person who's working with, various third-party vendors to get those kids to school. Our folks who are in shelter. If that person's not there, I don't know who does that, especially when our principals and our administrators are taking on already so much. So when you really think about it, when you get down to the classroom, to the building level, we're talking about things that would just completely disrupt a lot of our schools. And a school like mine, where we have, over 90% of our kids on free and reduced lunch, where we are primarily, students of color, overwhelmingly students of color, not primarily, 90% black and brown students. Those are the kids who are going to be impacted if we say no to this kind of levy. And once again, this madness that we're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C. And it's going to have real impact on real lives. And then we're talking not just thinking when we think of our mental health support, not just thinking about our older kids, thinking about our young ones, our 5-year-olds, our 6-year-olds, not getting the services and those early interventions. That's scary. That is truly scary.
Oftentimes those co-located services are very beneficial because our families may not, have the transportation to take their child to the physician. They may not have health insurance. And with what's happening with the federal government, they may not just have health insurance, period. And having those co-located services right in schools makes such a difference to have that mental health organization, Washburn, the different organizations right within our schools, because kids can go down during lunch and have a therapy session at the same time. And, we had to, I hadn't started yet, but I watched the process, and there were programs that the board had to make a very difficult decision on, our Achievement Plus programs that had to come out of our schools. All of those were important programs that support the mental health needs because they're also providing tutoring. Mental health, it's well-rounded there. If I'm struggling with math and I don't have a tutor, that does impact my psychological safety at school. So.
Okay, next question. Because places like Texas have blamed the teaching of civics, what are you doing to engage high school and college youth, AI, etc., in politics, government, and civics?
That's an interesting one. I can speak from, I think, a high level, and then I wonder, Superintendent, if you can share a little bit about some of the work that on our high school level, right, that we are doing to make sure that students understand not only their opportunity but also their power. One of I think the proudest moments for many members of the board and the community has been to watch the way in which our students advocate for the things that they need. And I think a prime example of that was critical ethnic studies. And I think there is an idea or a perception of what critical ethnic studies is, and what it fundamentally is when you are in the classroom experience is allowing students to think critically and thoughtfully about the world around them and the world in which they exist. I have had the opportunity now every year of my time on the board to sit in and have conversations with high schoolers in various different programs across the district about not just critical ethnic studies, but the pieces and the things that they are curious about. That's ranged from everything from what does it mean to be a voter? And why should I do it? And why should young people be aware and ready and able to participate, to what does it mean to make sure that my community has access to high quality, fresh produce and food in my neighborhood because I don't have a grocery store that's walkable. Like, these are issues and topics that adults are grappling with, that our students are now able to piece by piece take apart and then continue that work, whether they are going off to college or whether they are staying right here in St. Paul and moving into trades or doing something else, but still able to navigate those conversations and those spaces. And so I think that's a really big piece, and it's been an investment. And not surprisingly, it has also been an investment that has gotten a lot of criticism from folks who are perhaps threatened by that, who want to limit what it is that we can talk about and what students can advocate and raise for themselves. And so I would lift that up. And I know that there has been some legislation in recent sessions about civics and making sure that students not only understand why they should vote, but how do they vote. There was legislation that was passed that requires school districts to have voter registration forms and to make sure that students are able to access as many opportunities to use their voice as possible.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair Henderson. I have been in classrooms recently where students were actually having such critical discourse around what is happening in the Ukraine, right? Really being able to share their perspectives. In one of the classrooms, there was a young lady who spoke to the personal, local, and immediacy of the Ukraine, because she spoke to the fact that she had relatives that were living in the Ukraine. When we narrow down those conversations, or the government's attempt to narrow down those conversations, we are not preparing our kids for the broader world that they live in, and certainly not preparing them to change the world that they live in. And so I am proud to say in St. Paul Public Schools, we honor our new social studies standards. We're not trying to water our social studies standards down. Our social studies standards prepare the teachers to engage students in ways that allow them to look at any specific event or something that's happening through multiple perspectives. When I said that I was at Highland and I was actually on their theory of knowledge class, they were talking about climate change, and they were having serious conversations about climate change. And these are 11th and 12th graders who I was just so impressed, honestly, with the level of depth in what they were thinking about, not just themselves, but they were talking about generations down. To me, that is the civic discourse that we need to have. Then there's we had a day where to honor and to recognize the 50th anniversary of our Hmong students and families being in St. Paul. They marched right to the Capitol, and they honored that. So it is certainly the everyday things that are happening in the classroom, but then it's giving them that experience to understand how powerful their voice is. I am I'm over 100 days now, but as part of my 100-day onboarding, I sent a survey out to all of our families, to 9th through 12th grade students, and I received email from students saying, "Thank you. I appreciate that you sent that survey to me." That is the true engagement of student voice, and that's what allows them to know that they really truly have that opportunity for civic engagement.
Let's move on to the next question. How will this referendum be different for student achievement versus past referendums over the past 10 years?
Do you want to take that one?
Or you can. I think in the past, referenda was about lowering class sizes. Referenda was certainly about bringing in possibly different types of programs. I think right now what is critical is the board has set board-initiated governance goals to increase our literacy scores. And so the difference is we are really working to maintain the resources that are in our school systems so that we can hone in with a laser-like focus to really ensure students are reading at grade level by 3rd grade. It isn't about lowering those class sizes at this time. It's about maintaining those lower class sizes while also utilizing the resources that we have, our SIPS teachers, different human resources that we have that are not required, that would have to come off the table to support that academic support.
Okay. I'm prefacing this with my word, you are only making cuts in classes, i.e. arts and science. What about sports? Never see sports cut.
Well, sports are definitely on the table. I was out at Eastham Magnet the other day, and the principal was giving an announcement, and she's a middle school principal, and she talked about the competitions that were going to be on campus for the different sport events. And I sat there, and honestly, what came through my mind is she might not be giving these announcements about that next year, because in St. Paul Public Schools, to ensure that all of our students have access to those, we pay for that out of the regular budget. We don't want a student to not have access because their families can't afford that. Again, that could be what's seen as the icing on the cake, and then we would have to reduce that. I think what I have tried to explain to folks is that it wouldn't be, well, we'll do arts and music or athletics. It would be both the arts and music and athletics, because it would take all of that to make up a reduction of $37.2 million.
I would also push back on the idea that we haven't already experienced substantial disruption to our athletic programs. And I know, Quintin, you can probably speak to some of this from some of the experience and knowledge you have of athletics, but there is, in my time on the board, every year there has been concern, frustration, and confusion about how the district can continue to support athletics to the caliber that our students deserve. We have had to shift to co-ops instead of school communities being able to have the individual services and things that they need in every single building, or as many buildings as we could. We have had partnerships where we've had to increase dues, right? There have been impacts to athletics. There have been impacts to what students are able to access. And we also know that when families who are thinking about athletics is something that is passionate, is really exciting and important for their child, they're looking at what we can offer, and then they're also looking at what other districts can offer. Mm-hmm. Other districts have high quality facilities, and we have brilliant staff, and we have wonderful programs, but we can't necessarily compete with Wayzata. Like it's an entirely different program, and it becomes inequitable in so many cases then when students are trying to navigate that and want to be able to engage. And it is the thing that drives them back into our school buildings and to attend and to get the grades that they need to get to be able to continue to perform. So I want to push back on the idea that we haven't already made those really hard decisions.
This question is for Dr. Stanley. How does the passing of the referendum ensure you get or have the kind of teachers, staff, that are an excellent teaching force?
Thank you for bringing that up, whoever said that, because that was another one of the items that our community said that they would support the referendum for. Quintin can tell you, teaching is not the teaching that happened for me when I was teaching. I had an overhead projector, and I had, transparencies, vis-a-vis markers. Our teachers have to be trained in technology to levels that they've never had to be. That requires professional development. Our teachers have to be trained in new, solid ways of teaching children reading that we've learned about recently with the science of reading. That takes ongoing professional development. The board just received a report last night about the READ Act, and the READ Act, it's a lot of hours for teachers to go through training, and while we received some funding from the state, the funding did not cover all of the training. And so in order to make sure that we're recruiting, we have to make sure that people see our district is worthy and working in. We want to be able to advertise that whole child experience, And we need to let them know that we're going to be able to continue to provide mentors. We're going to be able to continue to provide the training that they need to be successful in their classrooms.
This next question is for our Pioneer Press reporter. It's a two-parter. The first part by an audience member is, how much will our taxes go up? The second part, does that $309 per year include the other tax increases as well, such as county and the city proposals? So please answer the question in terms of this levy, how much taxes will go up, and then the more general answer.
Okay. So in terms of how much your taxes will go up, that depends on quite a few factors, so I wouldn't be able to tell you that. But in terms of if the proposed county, city levies are approved as well as this referendum, it can really depend on neighborhood as well. So for example, in the Thomas Dale neighborhood, that has the highest percentage increase in terms of property taxes, not the highest increase in terms of actual number, because again, you're basing this off of average home value. And as well, I'm also basing these numbers off of before the school district approved their annual levy. So these numbers, I'm not quite sure how much they've changed since then. The downtown St. Paul area would have the smallest percentage increase at 8%. So again, it really just depends on where you are in St. Paul, your average home price, other things like that. That $309 per year, that's just referring to this referendum. So that's about $26 a month. In terms of adding in the city and county numbers, again, that would have to be based on whether they are actually reach those maximum levies as well. For example, Ramsey County approved a maximum levy increase of 9.75%. However, that could go down by the time they are required to approve it in December. That's just their maximum. So I'd really just pay attention when you're getting your preliminary tax reports. I think that answered the second question.
Thank you. This is for our chair, Halla, and for Dr. Stanley. How can or in what ways can the community add value to the referendum, especially if it does not pass?
So I think if it does not pass, there will need to be immediate organizing to on a state level to try to ensure that we're getting some additional dollars. I caution, however, the likelihood of that. The state is projecting a shortfall. I think that there will be, and Dr. Stanley has alluded to this quite a few times, but there will need to be really hard conversations. And we are, unfortunately, now becoming quite skilled in holding those community conversations. But I think being able to come together and talk about priorities, but then talk about priorities in terms of what are we willing to lose, as opposed to what are we willing to keep, and walk with us through that and walk through what we know will be an incredibly painful time for our city.
It will definitely be that time where we have to link arms and come together to make some really difficult decisions. I do want to kind of go back to that other question and add some information, because I have, as I'm out and about talking recently, I've been talking with a lot of our elders, and they are talking about being on a fixed income. And I was at the superintendent's conference and went to a session, and I found out something that maybe people know, but I also want to just share this. I learned that for a family that has an average price home of $289,200, if your household income is $73,055 or less, you could submit for a residential property tax refund of $210. And so I see heads shaking, like some people know about that. And for for this particular referenda, that would change it from being a $309 a year impact to $99 a year. If you have a household income of $100,000, there would be a property tax refund credit of $195, which would change it to $114. You know, if it's a lesser home, there's information. So what we've done is we've put this out on our website, because regardless, I think that our elders should know about that. I think folks who are on a fixed income should have that information regardless. And I just wanted to take time to be able to share that.
We have 4 questions left in about 3 minutes, so these will have to be very brief answers, and I need about 30 seconds to wind up. This is for Dr. Stanley or our board chair. How will the passage or not passing of the referendum impact the possibility of the new proposed opening of the Afrocentric school?
Well, fortunately, Benjamin E. Mays has been around for a while, and it will be there. The building's there. One of the things that we know that we would have to look at is just continuing to look at our facilities and continuing to look at, do we have to make some reductions overall in our schools? Now, I'm not going to say that, Benjamin E. Mays Afrocentric be necessarily guaranteed one that's on the table, but we do have to look at the enrollment in schools, and we look at so many different variables to determine if we're able to keep schools open. And so I think it is fair to say we would absolutely have to start looking at things like that if this referenda didn't pass.
Okay. This is for Dr. Stanley. What will be cut, or what are the likely areas that will be cut other than staffing and programs?
I mean, staffing and programs make up 83% of our budget. So, oftentimes that is where the reductions would come from. Last year of the reductions, about 74% were with administration. And as I've been out and about, people have said, there's a lot of positions at 360, and 360 is our district office. And I've done the calculations. I've worked with our finance department. And the reality is, if every position in the 360 office, except for mine, only because I'm superintendent. I mean, they could run the district by themselves. So, were eliminated. Every position, HR, finance, every position, that still would only be a reduction of $25 million. So we still would have to come up with an additional $12 million. And the reality is we have to have HR. We have to have business and finance. But more importantly, what another office that is in 360 is our Office of Family Engagement. That is outreach to our families, of our linguistically diverse families, our African American families around engagement. I would not want to lose that department. It is vital.
Okay. We've reached the end of our allotted hour, and with that, the formal part of our forum is going to draw to a close. If your question was not answered, the panelists will stay around, and you'll get the chance to talk to them individually. Once again, thanks to SPNN for recording this program, and thanks to our panel members, to you in the audience, to those who will view this event on various electronic platforms, and of course, a special thank you to the St. Paul chapter of the NAACP for organizing tonight's forum. Remember, Election Day is November 4th. Make your plans now to vote. Good night.